Welcome, fellow wildlife avengers, to the Conservationists Assemble. My name is Jonny Bloxham, but here I am known as my alter ego, Captain Conservation, your friendly neighbourhood animal advocate. I am a former zookeeper with a passion for conservation education and the global efforts for threatened species and habitats around the world. And I am inviting you to join me as we take the fight to our planet's biggest villain and my arch-nemesis, extinction. Whether you're new to animal advocacy or a veteran in wildlife preservation, this is the podcast for you. Each week, I'll be teaming up with Earth's mightiest wildlife heroes to unify the greatest collaboration of conservationists ever known, where we will be discussing our planet's epic species and what is being done to save them. This is the Conservationists Assemble. Will you join the fight? Hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Conservationists Assemble podcast. How have you all been? What experiences with nature or thoughts have you had about wildlife this week? Maybe you visited a zoo or heard some wildlife news that sparked an emotion and got you thinking. If this is you and you want to share, you can join the conversation by email or message on Instagram, both of which I've linked in the show notes. Today's episode is about a species and a biodiversity hotspot that is rooted within the history of our understanding of evolution, taxonomy, and could arguably be considered one of the single biggest events that has shaped our understanding of the natural world. I of course am talking about the Galapagos Islands, destination for the HMS Beagle in 1835, where a young Charles Darwin voyaged, collected specimens and penned his thoughts, bringing them back to the Western world. Specimens that can still be observed in the Natural History Museum today. One particular specimen is the octopus that Darwin himself had sitting on his desk whilst perhaps noting his thoughts that would ultimately become the globally renowned works that is On the Origin of Species. On the topic of the Natural History Museum, if this kind of thing is interesting to you, I highly recommend their Spirit Tour, where you get to go behind the scenes and see the specimens that aren't on display and still not even touch the surface of the amount of specimens housed there. Now, while it's well documented that there are a vast array of wildlife that calls the Galapagos home, we're kicking off our look into this world with perhaps the most famous resident of the islands, the Galapagos giant tortoise. Joining me now is Dr. Claudia Rudolph von Rohr, EEP Coordinator for the Galapagos Giant Tortoise Programme and representing Zoo Zurich, to shed some light on what we know of the world of the Galapagos giant tortoise and the conservation actions centred on their survival. Claudia, welcome to the Conservationists Assemble. Thank you for teaming up with me today. How are you?
Yeah, hello, Johnny. Very good. Very excited to talk to you about Galapagos tortoises, actually.
I'm glad to hear you're doing well. Before we get into the thick of it, discussing your work and the collective efforts for the Galapagos giant tortoise, could you please introduce yourself in a bit more detail to our listeners?
Yeah, so hello everybody. My name is Claudia Rudolph von Rohr, and actually I'm the zoological director of Zoo Zurich and also the EP coordinator of the Galapagos giant tortoises. I started in 2018, and what's the fun fact? Actually, I'm a primatologist by training, so I'm a mammal person, and I had to learn a lot about reptiles and tortoises, specifically, and I learned a lot, and I'm just a learner, and I'm happy when I can learn. So that was fantastic, although I'm a primate person. So I have worked at Zurich for 10 years now, actually. Yeah. So I'm in my 11th year this year. Yeah.
Fantastic, and we'll definitely take a deeper look into how a primatologist got into the role of an EEP coordinator for a reptile species a bit later on, and just generally looking into your journey throughout your career. But to start off our conversation about the Galapagos giant tortoise, could you just please tell us what they're about? What do we know about them?
So the species is actually, as I just mentioned, they are reptiles, and that they are endemic to the Galapagos Islands, which is, I think almost everybody knows the Galapagos Islands because they are so famous for Darwin and his theory. So the Galapagos Islands are per se a remarkable example of speciation, and were actually the primary inspiration of Darwin's theory of the origin of species.
Yeah, and I think when you think about the Galapagos, you automatically go to Darwin and the giant tortoise, and those two things alone, they have so much to provide, or so much to be credited for, in terms of the archipelago, and like say our understanding of taxonomy as a result of the origin of species. And yeah, there's so much to unpack about this species. Obviously, they're the largest species of tortoise on the planet. They are able to live for over 100 years, when you talk about Jonathan the tortoise, or being the last wild one, or Lonesome George. But the things that we don't perhaps know is that actually the Galapagos itself, the islands, the word Galapagos is derived from Galapago, an old Spanish word for tortoise, and so almost the two are intertwined. But from a conservation standpoint, certainly within ex situ organisations, how do we effectively go about conserving the giant tortoise? Or the Galapagos giant tortoise, sorry, because there are, if I'm correct, multiple different subspecies, and so do we know what subspecies or what species are housed within zoos, and how are we properly, or how are we effectively managing those populations for productive conservation output?
Yes, actually there is, so the IUCN ranges from vulnerable to critically endangered, and actually there are 3 species already extinct, and there were once 15 species of Galapagos tortoises, and nowadays there are 12 species, as I just said, and the discussion is still whether they are a subspecies or actually a species, so this discussion is still going on. And then looking at my EP program, what we are doing right now is to have a genetical overview about the animals in the program, because what people did years ago, they imported these animals, not knowing that years ago sailors collected these animals and also brought them to different islands. So actually we cannot be quite sure which species or subspecies we are having in the program. So this is something quite interesting, but also something that is quite important, because it will tell us on which species we can focus in zoological institutions. Yeah. And then also when it comes to morphology, there are like distinctions. So you have either the saddleback tortoises, or then those with a dome. And so basically diet shapes the form of the shell. This is something that's something exciting, actually.
Oh, that is interesting. So what is it specifically about the diet that influences the shape of the shell?
So put bluntly, they are like generalist mega herbivores, like our cows, for example. However, the diet is, as I just said, correlated to their shell shape. So on the one hand, you find the saddlebacks, and they are living on arid islands. They are mainly browsers and living a sedentary lifestyle and eating like opuntia, which is a cactus. And on the other hand, you have dome-shell tortoises, which are migratory grazers living in humid highlands. So actually, when you live in an arid landscape, you need to have like a longer neck to reach or to have access to the various plants that they are eating. And so the saddlebacks have like an adapted shell that actually they can stretch their neck to have access to the plants. And the dome-shaped animals, as we just heard, they are grazers, and so they have a shell like a dome, so they do not need so much, how can I say, mobility in their neck. So because they're actually facing downwards and just eating grass.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I suppose important to mention that even though they're a group of islands, that there is that ecological diversity amongst them, and so you are seeing appropriate responses morphologically or behaviourally in some cases to those differences between subspecies or species. And you mentioned earlier that between species that they're classified from vulnerable to endangered on the IUCN Red List. So what specifically is the reason why they are classified as such?
So the main threats were and still are extensive overexploitation actually for food by sailors, and back then, and settlers introduced various species, including like livestock, dogs, cats, and actually rats. And furthermore, a wide range of those predators and ecological competitors, as well as these introduced invasive vegetation, is changing the nutrients or the diet for these Galapagos tortoises, or even the availability of food, because livestock, goats, they are just grazing like the Galapagos tortoises, right? So they are just eating all the grass, and but also introduced vegetation, which is changing the native vegetation on these islands. So but then you mentioned that their home is the Galapagos Islands, which is until today kind of a very active volcanic region. So this is always something that can have a really bad outcome when a volcano erupts.
To change track now and focus on the long living nature of this species, and certainly more so under human care, is there any benefit or how do we care for such a species that lives this long under human care?
The good thing is that you get long-term experience, all right? Because you have to just be responsible for these individuals for such a long time, and you need to transfer all the knowledge, for instance, for a specific individual. And when it comes to knowledge from the wild, actually we do not know what baby or juvenile animals are doing in the wild, because they have a high predation risk. So they hide under the vegetation, and actually we do not know what they are doing until they become large and not kind of have the risk anymore to get eaten, right? So and this is the interesting thing when it comes to zoological institutions, that we can do research about how they grow up, how fast they grow, how diet impacts their growth, whether they are social or not, or become less social or become more social when they grow up, because in the wild it's not that they are completely solitary, so they do have, they come together so that they have a certain sociality going on. Yeah, and for me as an EP coordinator, it's nice because you have a lot of time making decisions, and I mean, they only reproduce with 25 years old. It's when they start reproducing, so you need to take care for an individual for a long time until you know whether reproduction will work or not, and also whether a male or a female get along. And this is something really interesting we had here at Zoo Zurich, that we have a pair that is producing still very well, but somehow they have a mutual attraction. And so this is something I learned is also present in reptiles, that maybe you need to like each other, that things will eventually work out. Yeah, just a fun fact.
So in the effort of trying to determine which species are present in zoological institutions, how does that information that we have, or conversely the lack of information perhaps, influence your decisions when you're making your recommendations or preparing to transfer individuals between establishments?
At the moment, I'm a little bit reluctant to, I do transfer animals, and I want to get them in breeding situations, because I don't know whether you know that Zoo Zurich was one of the first successful institution breeding that species. So we need to make sure that more zoological institutions get the knowledge how to breed this species. So that's why I'm trying to get as much individuals in a breeding situation, although I do not know exactly what the species is. And even at Zurich we are producing hybrids. But this actually is not necessarily the idea. But we know that we are producing hybrids, and we at Zoo Zurich do not breed any longer. But what is still interesting for me, and coming back to age, is that just checking whether the eggs are still fertile from a female that is 85 years old, and just to observe when her fertility starts to declining, or when she stops laying eggs, right? So yes, I do want breeding situations, but I do not necessarily want to have hybrid offspring until we haven't exactly decided on which species we want to focus. And maybe also then, maybe that's the best we have. If we cannot import from the wild or from the States, and then we just need to be honest and accept, okay, we have hybrids, but nevertheless they have an educational value for our visitors. And the subspecies discussion is still going on, and there are maybe also hybrids in the wild. So which is, maybe this is then an ethical discussion, whether it's okay, should we really manage on a subspecies level, or can we save at least hybrids? Or what are we doing in zoos, and how can we have, at least if it's not a conservation impacts in terms of reintroducing animals, we still have a large impact when it comes to conservation education or research when it comes to diet or fertility and age, etc.
Yeah, thank you for talking about that. Actually, I think it's crucial to keep advertising or advocating for the depth and the complexity of the role of a modern zoo, and certainly how they can put positives or make what aren't ideal situations into a positive, such as okay, yeah, maybe we've bred hybrids in the past as a result of a lack of information, but moving forward, we're changing that and we're utilising the individuals that we have to, for example, determine at what point the fertility of a giant tortoise within human care starts to deteriorate. And having mentioned that, these hybrids are also occurring in the wild, what collaboration do in situ and or what collaboration occurs between ex situ and in situ communities for the Galapagos giant tortoise conservation efforts?
So as a EP coordinator, it's not like a dictatorship where I just can decide and I'm the only one that decides, but every EP has a species committee of several experts sitting in different zoos, in different regions, not necessarily regions, but different countries, let's put it that way. And we are having these discussions together and then decide together what makes sense for the future management of the species. So this is called like a long-term management plan, where you just know how many animals you have, what is the genetical background, who is related with whom, and which roles can the EP have within EASA. Does it have a direct conservation role, which would be like an insurance population with the possibility of reintroducing animals, which in my case now, Galapagos, they are doing a lot in the wild, and they are breeding centers on the islands, and they are reintroducing the animals. That's of course the best you can have. So maybe our animals are not necessary for reintroducing, but not everybody can travel to the Galapagos islands, and that is then the cool thing, to have those animals in zoological institutions. And this then would be an indirect role, conservation education, and just see how, visitors are just amazed how large these reptiles get, and to fascinate the public. So actually this is all defined in these long-term management plans, what we actually can and should achieve. And this is decided among the species committee and myself. So the collaboration now with it's the Darwin Center, breeding center. So we are in contact with each other when it comes to knowledge, etc. But I think we still, and you never have enough information exchange or collaboration that is going on. So I think because they are doing such a great job and they are successful with breeding, I think we first need to do our homework and get better in breeding, etc. So, but what was really interesting to see is this research have been now like 15 years ago or so, that we found out that the Galapagos tortoises under human care are growing too fast, like 4 times faster than their wild counterparts. And this is information that we can only get from a breeding center, like from the wild, because otherwise what would be our reference, right? And as I just said, the wild juveniles, you don't find them, so only the breeding center can actually give you that input, because they have the natural vegetation and to feed their animals. And then you see, we are feeding too much to our animals, which can lead to I don't know whether you know when they get those pyramids on the shell, which is actually a sign that they are growing too fast and that you need to adjust their diets. And this is something I really are working hard on it, that people do get the diet right of their animals. But I think nutrition is a topic that is a never-ending story. You always can optimize the nutrition. The more you know, the more you need to adjust.
Yeah, I think that's a kind of a nice point to round up our conversation, alluding to the Galapagos giant tortoise, about how we've now discovered that the ones under human care are growing 4 times faster than their wild counterparts, and that might have implications in terms of the end goal, but also at the same time it provides that scope for the direction of zoological institutions' roles within the conservation of this species. So now, to switch track, we're going to look at how a primatologist by training got involved in the EP program for a reptile, and we're going to look at how your journey to your career has led to where you are now. So, Claudia, could you please walk us through how you got to where you are in your career currently?
So I started, or by training I'm a primatologist, and I entered the zoo world actually with my dissertation, which I was allowed to do in 2 different Swiss zoos. And actually was there that I noticed that working together as a team with or around animals is something that really makes me happy, basically. So it's all about teamwork, working together with people, but together with zoos. It's about nutrition, it's about behavioral enrichment, it's about breeding, it's about animal welfare, it's about veterinary challenges. So it's so many topics that come together in a zoo, which actually never let me go, and which feeds my passion. So I decided that my career is a zoo career. I didn't want to stay at the university and have a life of just publications and collecting money. So I decided that I want to become a curator, and so there was a curator assistant's position open, and I applied and got the job. And so I got from a junior curator to a curator up to the zoological director. Because I really like working together with people.
In terms of procuring a role as an EEP coordinator with the Galapagos giant tortoise, how did that opportunity present itself?
Mm-hmm. So actually I was allowed to take over different sections at Zoo Zurich, and of course there was the EEP included, and I was at first not really sure whether I'm the right person. I'm a mammal person, now being responsible for reptiles, and there are better experts than I am. And all of a sudden I noticed that I don't need to be the best or to have the most knowledge about this species, but I actually need to coordinate and be able to talk to the experts and bring all that knowledge together, and then push decisions forward. So for a long time I felt bad because everybody knew better about that species, but maybe not everybody likes to discuss or coordinate maybe as much as I do. And I think that also is reflected by my career. So it's more about people management than actually about the animals per se, of course, I'm fascinated by these animals. I mean, when you for the first time are allowed to touch such an animal, it's just fantastic, right? And then you have an individual that is 85 years old. That is just, yeah, it's just you feel a lot of respect for the journey that this individual had, and this is basically my fascination, why I'm still on board.
Now, going back to when your career first started, were there any particular elements that surprised you, or perhaps any parts of your role that you didn't foresee them being a part of your role?
I think what surprised me is how motivated and passionate people are about animal husbandry, caring for a different living being. It's all about the passion. That is what surprised me most, and how complex it is to care for an animal, and how complex it is to work for a zoo, and how many topics are under the umbrella of a zoo. It's not just keeping animals, but it's so much more, which I think we need to better convey to the public what actually our daily job is.
As you rightly mentioned earlier, it's not one person contributing towards conservation, and that's certainly not the case within zoos also. So what was some of the best advice that you received throughout your career, and what advice would you give to those either looking to get into a career within zoos, or those who are in the early days of their zoo career?
The best advice that I received is to how is the correct word in English, to be patient, to be open, to see opportunities rather than challenges or problems. That is the best advice, and the advice I would give to the next generation is that to become an animal keeper or a biologist, just travel, go and work for different projects, work for different zoos if somehow possible. And I think the more passionate or motivated you are, people will notice that. And you will then just automatically, I think, do your journey or have your career.
So, looking back on your career then, what are some of your proudest achievements to date?
I'm proud to be now responsible for 8 curators at Zoo Zurich, and just to be able to work in a zoo that is innovative, that has so much passionate and motivated people, and where also sometimes intense discussions can be held. It's just I like when it becomes intense and when your work has a purpose.
Conversely then, what else would you like to achieve in your career?
Yes, to actually invest in the next generation coming up, be it animal keepers or be it curators, just to give support, advice, and develop those personalities, because I think we need to invest in that future. and in the people that are still passionate about nature, about biodiversity. So I like seeing people grow, and that's something I would like to achieve, to be retired in my position and to know that the next generation is ready to take over.
And on that note, what are some of the ways that maybe those in positions such as yourself as director or curators or just in senior positions, what are some of the ways that they are preparing the younger generation to take the helm as and when the time arises? Because as when we were communicating in terms of you appearing on the podcast to discuss the Galapagos giant tortoise, you mentioned that you was attending the ARSA annual conference. What do you think that networking does for the younger generation?
But I mean, I'm 10 years now in that business, so to say. And what I am noticing is that young people are giving talks about topics, about their engagement, about their achievements, which I think are just fantastic. It's not anymore just reporting numbers of UEP, so many births, so many deaths, so many transfers, but really people talking about like case studies basically, or observations or experiences, and that people start to talk with each other. And I think that's quite typical for the next generation. They are so agile and fluid, and they want to share information and not just think, we know better, or it's absolutely not a competitive approach anymore, but it's all about sharing and achieving a goal together. And that was a movement or a groove that I think, yes, we stopped working in silos. Now we start talking about each other for the better for the animals and the species, because no one can do it alone.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there, and you know, to that point, there's no limit as to what attending these conferences can achieve. And it, you know, during my time zookeeping, it was certainly one of my favourite things to do, because you attend a conference for 1, 2, 3 days, sometimes longer now, with the amount of knowledge to be shared. And then you know, you've been around like-minded people for a few days. Not that you're not when you're in the workplace anyway, but you return to the workplace feeling refreshed and ready to hit the ground running. So Claudia, I think with that last question, you've given us a nice insight into what you're all about as a working professional in this industry. And we're just going to close the episode out with some fun, light-hearted questions. So my first one for you is are there any dream species that you'd love to see in the wild or to work with?
Yes, actually it's polar bears. I would like to travel to Svalbard and see them in the wild. And I think personally that I think we can keep these species, but we haven't found out how to keep those animals in an innovative manner.
Yeah, polar bear husbandry is certainly a bone of contention within zoos, but it's with those bone of contentions that standards improve over time, and I definitely think we're starting to see that transition into more natural, open enclosures that you know replicate the polar bear's natural environment as opposed to the artificial glacier looking enclosures of old, and certainly moving away from bear pits in general. And with that, you know, I get why you want to visit the north. I think that it's certainly a common thing that people want to travel to the tropics to see animals, and they've certainly, you know, got lots to offer. Having been to Southeast Asia last year and actually returning to different parts of Southeast Asia later on this year, there's definitely a lot to offer. But I'm right there with you. Definitely the kind of the Great White North is top of my bucket list also. So yeah, I hope you get to Svalbard at some point to see the polar bears and all of the other amazing wildlife that they have to offer. Now, it's well known that this career is quite intensive, and so finding that work-life balance is incredibly important. When you're not working to save wildlife and aid conservation, how do you relax?
A stroll in nature, actually. Sometimes I just need some calm and silent spots to recover, as I just said, from the intense exchanges or discussions or work, or filling up my batteries and do some introspection, actually.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would certainly agree with you that a stroll in nature is good for the soul, and almost it's very cathartic. That what relaxes you from this industry in terms of your downtime is actually maybe something that inspired you to get into the industry in the first place, in the sense that you're exposing yourself to nature, and that arguably is perhaps an influence to many people in wanting to get involved in conservation. So yeah, like I say, I'm sure a lot of people would agree with you that taking a walk in nature and turning off from everything that happens in the office or at the workplace can work wonders. Now, if people wanted to keep up to date with the work of Zoo Zurich and more so the work of the EEP program for the Galapagos giant tortoise, are there any great resources that people can have access to in order to do so?
I think when you mentioned what people can do, for instance, and I was thinking about Switzerland, what always triggers me is when it comes to microplastic or drinking with these straws, that I think, okay, Switzerland is not even close to the ocean, but thinking about my daily behavior can have an effect on the ocean, even if it's just a plastic bag. So how can you reduce in your daily life the use of plastic, microplastic? So this is something I can do myself daily. And there's also, if you want to get involved, we have the Galapagos, or the Friends of Galapagos Islands in Switzerland, where you can become an active member and be on track what is going on in the wild, actually. And also what I always like is not just when it comes to Galapagos tortoises, but when it comes to conservation topics in general, is always go and check out Mungo Bay. I don't know whether you know Mungo Bay, and I think they have just a really excellent stories and articles that you can get informed about the challenges out there. So get informed and reduce microplastic or plastic in general, basically.
Yeah, always a great point to include a plea to reduce the use of plastics and prevent microplastics also. And yeah, I'll definitely be providing links to Mungo Bay and Friends of the Galapagos in the show notes, and hopefully people will be inspired to go and check that out. And I'm certainly more informed, and I hope our listeners are too. So Claudia, thank you for teaming up with me on the Conservationists Assemble to discuss the Galapagos giant tortoise and everything surrounding their conservation, and also just to give us an insight into your career. I'm sure people within the industry always like to hear how others have achieved their work-based achievements. So yeah, thank you for teaming up with me It's been a pleasure to chat with you and connect with you, and we wish you all the best with the rest of your career going forward.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jonny, for giving the Galapagos Tortoise such a fantastic platform, and just to have a talk with you, and thank you very much.
And of course, a huge shout out to you, my fellow wildlife avengers, for tuning in. If you've enjoyed this volume of the podcast and wish to join the fight, please follow, subscribe and rate the podcast wherever you stream from. Please also follow on social media to stay up to date with the podcast's latest developments, and share with your family and friends to help stack the odds in conservation's favour. And don't forget, you can join the fight by joining the conversation. Share your thoughts and suggestions on this episode, past episodes or future episodes via email at conservationists@outlook.com or Instagram at conservationistassemblepod, which are both linked in the show notes. If you have happened to snap pictures or videos of giant tortoises at a zoo or in far off lands this week, or this episode has left you with questions that you would like answered, these are also the places to share them to be featured on the podcast Instagram page. Be sure to tune in to next week's fantastic episode. Until then, this is Captain Conservation signing off, over and out.